Layoffs.fyi shows that more than 100,000 tech workers have been laid off already in 2022, and all signs indicate that this will continue in 2023 as tech enters into a pullback period. For the vast majority of you, this is going to be the first time that you've encountered a recessionary period or a mass layoff period in your career. In this video, I want to share some context on how we got here, and I want to share some advice about what to do if you've been laid off or if you think your company is headed in that direction. The COVID pandemic was, generally speaking, one of the best things that's ever happened to the tech industry. We were all sitting at home and you had the government literally handing out money to every single American. And the result was that you had more time and more money being spent online than ever before in the history of the internet. Almost every tech stock, public or private, ascended to an all-time high in value. You had companies like Zoom and Snapchat reach $100 billion market cap, Meta touched $1 trillion in market cap, and private company valuations were unbelievably high. During this time, naturally, you had companies hiring aggressively, often doubling their headcount or more in that 2-year period. And if you're the CEO of a company, it makes sense that you would want to hire because you're flush with cash, your metrics have never looked better, and it's kind of an ego thing where if you have the opportunity to build your team and build more things and build them faster, why wouldn't you do that? But it turns out all these companies were riding artificially high, and that growth was actually irresponsible. With COVID restrictions easing up, government spending getting cut back, and interest rates going up, money now became way more important than money later. So all those speculative projects that might pan out 3 or 4 years from now, all the things which have low margins, they all come under a lot more scrutiny now. Because payroll is such a huge part of the expenses for any tech company, it makes sense that the headcount that a company has is going to be put under question in a tough economic time like it is now. And that's why you have so many layoffs in 2022 so far, and I predict that will continue in 2023. If you've been impacted by a layoff or a reduction in force, the first thing to keep in mind is that a mass layoff is usually the indication of the company doing poorly and not necessarily you doing poorly. So don't take it personally. And it's also worth looking at the silver lining here. If you are at a company which had layoffs, but you weren't laid off, it's really not that fun to work there because the morale will be really bad and there's going to be a lot of fear. What will often happen is that companies will do a layoff, and it turns out those weren't deep enough. So they have to do a second or third round of layoffs, and increasingly the situation becomes more dire, which means that things like severance get reduced or worse for progressive rounds of layoffs. And so in some ways, the fact that you got laid off now is a sign that you don't have to be part of that environment anymore. The second thing you should do if you've been laid off is to understand your financial situation, both in terms of how much severance are you receiving and your personal finances. In the US, companies that are laying off a certain number of staff are required to give some warning or severance by law under the WARN Act. And so just make sure you read up on that and make sure you're getting all the benefits you're entitled to. What I found is that tier 1 companies will typically give a really generous package, like 14 weeks of pay and benefits that extend even longer than that. The important thing to keep in mind here is to make sure you do the math to understand your burn rate. Because the tech industry was always up and to the right for the past 10 or 12 years, I know a lot of engineers, myself included, who really never bothered to make a budget. They had so much money coming in, frankly, every month that they always met that 20%, 30% target, whatever it is, of how much you should be saving. Or they just expected that, okay, I'm going to get promoted next year, which is going to dramatically increase my compensation. And so many engineers don't really think about spending or saving. Now that things are not always up and to the right, it's really worthwhile to write down how much you're spending each month, what can you cut back on, and how much money do you have in the bank, and make sure you have at least 8 or 9 months of runway. And that will give you a lot more personal guarantee and safety that you have enough time to figure out your next move. The third thing to do if you've been laid off is to leverage your network to find your next opportunity. And I mean that both in terms of people at the company who can now advocate for you or rekindle a relationship with your ex-colleagues and figure out what they're up to. My number one advice when I help people with the job search is I tell them to use every unfair advantage they have. And so if you've been part of a mass layoff at a tier 1 company, that is inherently a huge advantage to you. So most companies like Stripe or Airbnb will have a mailing list or a Google Doc where people can seek you out as an alumni of that company. So use that and use the brand of your company as a way to get it in at a startup or another company. Just the credibility, the prestige of the company you just left can open up a lot of doors for you. The other more powerful unfair advantage is to actually use your network for referral. So go look up what your old manager, your old tech lead is doing, and there's a good chance that they would love to work with you again. So reach out to them and figure out if they have anything available. Finally, if you've been laid off, use this as an opportunity to pivot your career into a new direction that you've always wanted to go down. Turn lemons into lemonade. There are so many engineers who I talk to who have always dreamt about doing a startup or exploring a domain like climate tech or the fake meat industry, or they wanted to build an Android app, or they wanted to learn Haskell finally. There's so many things you could do with the power of being an engineer. And so this is a great opportunity to actually spend a month or two or longer pursuing what you've always been wanting to do. And if you have the ability, the privilege to take a break, go ahead and do that. Take a few months and do nothing. What I tell people is that creativity is bred in boredom. If you take a chance to actually try and be bored, you'll be surprised how creative you can be and how fulfilling that can be. That was the advice if you've been laid off recently, but if you haven't been laid off and you're concerned about it, I have two pieces of advice. Number one, build a network of amazing people within the company. If you do get laid off, the people you know and how much they trust you, how much they like you, will become a huge asset to finding your next opportunity, as we just talked about. Even if you don't get laid off, having a deep relationship with people is how you keep learning new things. It's how you discover new trends that will eventually change the shape of your career. Please don't make the mistake that you're a software engineer and therefore all you do is you spend time with your computer and you spend almost all your time in the code. If you're not actively spending time getting to know and cultivating relationships at work, you're doing it wrong. Software engineering is an inherently human endeavor. And that means that you should be spending time, allocating time for talking to people within and outside the company. The second tactical thing you can do if you are concerned about layoffs is to evaluate how critical is your team or your organization to the main priority of the company, and evaluate that both from the perspective of what the company is doing now and what the company wants to be doing 2 years from now. When layoffs do happen, the company is going to be cutting all the extraneous functions and things that will take a long time to pan out. And so if you're able to position yourself to the core competency of the company, the main revenue generator of the company now, and what the company is betting on, the main bet the company is making 2 years from now, the likelihood of you getting laid off is much lower. Try and figure out what those key areas are, and then see if you can move into that part of the company. By the way, one note here is that I don't actually think how well you get along with your manager has a big impact on whether you get laid off or not. Usually in these mass layoffs, an entire team or organization might get laid off, and it's not going to be dictated by how much your manager likes you or likes your work. In the long term, I'm confident that the growth and innovation in tech will continue. Even though the next year or so might be difficult, stay focused on what you can control and cultivate those deeper skills that will help you in the longer arc of your career. If I can help you in any way, feel free to reach out on LinkedIn. I'll do the best I can. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.